we recognize the names of. I don't know, if there's anybody new on the call, if we need to do introductions to ourselves, or have we met most of the colleagues already?
Brett, might be worth
Yeah.
just introducing yourself and Luann for the purposes of the video.
Oh, okay, thanks, Martin. So good morning, everybody. My name is Brett Cohen. I'm part of the consortium, the Gondwana's consortium, that is rolling out an ICAT project looking at supporting provincial governments on various aspects of greenhouse gas emissions reporting. And we've run a series of sessions which has been ongoing through the year, looking at aspects of inventories, at institutional structures. Today, we're having a look at tracking of actions. And then during the year, we're going to run more sessions around target setting and target tracking. And in addition, under this project, we have the opportunity to provide hands-on technical support to the individual provincial governments. So we, at the end of this session today, we're going to talk to you about what that might look like. So today's section is focusing on a guide for non-state actors and a tool, and a tool also to support mitigation action tracking. So I'm working with my colleague Luann, who's going to introduce herself in a moment, and between the two of us, we're going to be running today's session. Just a bit of housekeeping. I think that please, as always, we encourage interaction on these calls, so feel free to put up your hand and to ask questions. If we don't see the hands, I'll try and keep a track of that. If we don't see your hand, feel free to chip in and look for clarity, ask questions, that kind of thing. We are going to be, the way this session is going to be run is a combination of lectures, which Luann's going to do, and then tool demo, which I'm going to do. So, and sort of by the end of it, hopefully you'll have a feel for what for this material and what the tool can do. And then as part of our ongoing support, we are happy to provide you with further training on the tool. So, and today's session is obviously going to be using dummy data, but obviously as soon as you've got data that can be used, we'd encourage you to start using the tools while they're still fresh in your memory. But anyway, this will make a lot more sense by the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Luann just to introduce herself, and then she's going to start off the training session. So Luann, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, so just to reiterate what Brett's saying, so today we're just really going to introduce the climate action aggregation tool to you, but that is also formed part of the NSA guide, which is the non-state and subnational actors guide, which ICAT has put out. And so what we'll do is, I think that guide also provides a lot of information, background information to the tool. So we'll go through the guide and the process of doing the assessment, and then link this to the tool as well. And then, as Brett says, he'll do some demonstrations on the tool. And so this will be our introductory session, and then we will try to, at the end of the session, indicate that we will be trying to get together with the provinces and do some more hands-on training with specific information. So it would be good that, after the session, perhaps if provinces have some data, or that they can gather some data, so that we can organize some more hands-on training on the tool with your provincially specific data, because I think that would be a lot more useful. So yeah, so that's what we're going to do today. So let me switch over to my slides. Also, just to say, I have put a registration link. Let me just put it again in the chat. If everyone can just complete the registration link, I would appreciate it. Let me just put that in now for those that have just joined. Okay, yeah. And yes, please do just jump in if you have any questions, or raise your hand so that we can have a discussion as we go along with the process. Okay, can everybody see my presentation?
Yes, thanks, Leanne.
Okay, great. Okay, so as I said, today we're talking about the non-state and subnational action guide, which comes along with the climate aggregation tool, climate action aggregation tool, which is the CAAT tool, which are developed as part of on the ICAT project, and it's developed by WRI and the New Climate Institute. So just an overview of the various different ICAT tools, if any of you interested, and all of these tools you can access on the ICAT website. So there are a number of impact assessment methodologies for greenhouse gas impacts, looking at renewable energy, building efficiency, transport, agriculture, and forestry, as well as sustainable development, transformational change, and then the one that we are looking at today is the non-state and subnational action guide. And as I've mentioned, this is linked together with the tool, and this helps implement, the tool helps to implement the guide, the step-by-step process that is given within that guide. So it is quite good to work together, and the guide provides the methodological foundation, while the tool provides the ready-to-use and set of Excel spreadsheets to assist you in conducting that assessment. So as I mentioned, the tool is funded by ICAT and developed by New Climate Institute and World Resource Institute. It is Excel-based and it's open sourced, and we should have sent everybody a copy of the tool, but it is also downloadable from the website if anybody wants to access it that way. That's also fine. So the overall objective is really to obtain a better understanding of mitigation actions and the potential impacts of these climate actions in a country or in a region. And we just want to acknowledge WRI and New Climate Institute because we have been working with them, and they've been assisting us with training on the tool and providing us with some of the information in the presentations as well. So the primary function of the tool is really bookkeeping of sub and non-state actions. So really a list of activities is somewhere where you can create a list of all the activities that are going on in the region. They also are able to conduct a landscape analysis of these actions, and you're also able with the tool to aggregate the impacts of multiple actions to have a look what the overall impact is of these non-state or subnational actions. And so in this slide, we just show that, the dark blue and the yellow just shows the kind of information that will be needed for the tool, but we will go through this through the presentation in a bit more detail. So there are, I just want you to be aware, there are a number of accompanying documents which are quite helpful in terms of understanding the tool and the background information, or providing much more detail if you're interested in learning more about the actual methodology of the tool. So of course, there's firstly the aggregation tool, then there is a user guide, and I think these two I have sent, everybody should have received a copy of both of these. In addition to this, on the website, there is also a data template if you want to make use of that. And then a methodological note. The methodological note just describes the calculations within the tool in much more detail. So if you're really interested in knowing the background of how the calculations are completed and the methods used within the tool, then this is described in detail in the methodological note. There is also video training. If anyone is still unsure after this presentation, they can still go to the video training. I think there are 2 sets of videos which you can go through, which takes everybody through the various actions of the tool. So there are those. Then there is also a working paper which WRI put together, which I also found is quite useful, where they have looked at various different countries and examples, and explain a bit more about how the tool works. So there is also a bit more additional information in this working paper. And then lastly, there is the non-state and subnational action guide, which is what I am going to take you through today to really explain the process of why we're doing this, and what is contained within the guide and within the tool. So we'll be going through this guide. It has a sort of stepwise process, and so I'll be taking you through the various different steps and then linking it up with the tool. So this non-state and subnational action guide. So I mean, we're really looking at creating lists of and assessing what actions are occurring in a country or in a region that are non-state and subnational actions, and how these can contribute to the total overall impact. And so it's really about looking at that and how to incorporate these non-state and subnational actions into the assessments, and comparing it with national targets as well, and perhaps indicating how to improve what's the additionality and improve national actions as well. So the guide has 5 different parts. So there's the first part, just really gives an introduction, objectives, and key concepts. The second part is about how to define the assessment. And the third part is around the actual impact assessment and how you conduct the assessment. The fourth part is about reporting results. And the fifth is decision making and using those results. So we'll just step through the various different guides. I've just kept the process and the steps within each slide, so you know exactly where we are, and they are set out exactly as they are in the guide. So if you need to refer back to a particular section in the guide, it's easy to link it up with the presentation. Also, maybe just to say that I will send out a copy of the presentation to everybody at the end of the session, so you don't have to write everything down. So I will send that out afterwards at the end of the session. So in part 1, there is a chapter on understanding the purpose of the applicability of the guide, determining the objectives of the assessment, and then understanding key concepts and assessments before you actually move into the assessment process. So as we've already said, it's to support the purpose of the guide is to support national policymakers and analysts in assessing potential aggregated impacts of non-state and subnational actions. And this information can inform and improve the development of the greenhouse gas trajectories and climate relevant policies and targets. And, you know, we're always particularly interested in the NDC targets. And, you know, the guide is primarily written for national governments and for the tool as well, but it can also be used at a provincial level or by agencies or research institutes or NGOs. And so provincial governments can use this guide really to identify and assess the mitigation potential of the various different non-state and subnational actions in the province. So I think it is relevant and useful, and then this can be compared to national targets as well. And this will be, you'll see this as we go through the tool. So the guide provides principles, concepts, and procedures applicable to all types of non-state and subnational actions. It should be aware that the guide does not consider adaptation-related impacts. This is really because it has adaptation really has a lot of different metrics and different approaches to mitigation. So the guide and the tool at this point do not consider adaptation-related impacts. And it also looks at the ex-ante, the forward-looking assessment. It does not really include an explanation on post-assessment. Okay, so you should just be aware of the limitations or the boundaries of what are included in the guide. And then, of course, it links to the tool. If you open up the tool, I don't know if anyone had a chance to open up the tool, you will notice that there is an introductory page, and all of this information on the purpose of the tool and key principles are outlined in that introductory page within the tool. So the guide links quite nicely with the tool. Determining the objectives of the assessment is important to do this upfront, because this obviously will define how you're going to use the tool and what you're going to do in the various steps. So it's important to really determine the objectives of your assessment, because this will, you'll know what to include in your assessment and how to define the boundaries. So you really should know what you are trying to achieve by conducting such an assessment. And in the guide it provides, in the NSA guide, there's a lot of examples, which is sometimes helpful to explain some of the concepts. So it provides a lot of objective examples, for example, understanding the landscape of the NSA effort, or determining combined expected impact of all the NSA actions in a country, or determining the contribution of the actions towards the national targets or the NDC targets, and so on. So it does provide a lot of guidance in terms of through the use of examples. So determining the objective is important, because this will determine what the boundaries are going to be like, and what you're going to include in the assessment, and therefore what you're going to include in the tool. There is a section which explains a lot of the basic key concepts that are used throughout the guide. I've just picked out some of the important aspects that we will probably talk about and use in the tool. So there are different ways that you can aggregate your actions. And so there is firstly the bottom-up aggregation approach. This is where you're adding the individual impacts of the actions to determine the total potential impact of all the actions included in the assessment. Okay, so this is looking at adding up the impacts of each of the individuals based from a reference. And so this impact is not additional to the impact of the national policy. So it's just basically the overall impact of each of the individual actions relative to a baseline. The bottom-up assessment can be used to understand aggregated greenhouse gas emission reduction potentials of the actions. How big is the projected impact? Compare the collective projected impact with reductions needed at a national level, and compare trends over time. Yeah, and really the aim is to see where you are at, to conduct an assessment and recognize and encourage where further actions can be put in place. So I've just provided here an example of a bottom-up assessment where, and you can see you can also combine the assessments, and this is also done within the tool. So we can have a look at, we'll talk about a landscape assessment just now, but you can have a bottom-up, a top-down, or a landscape assessment. And so I'll talk a little bit about the three different ones, and when we go into the tool, you can see how to do all three of these different types of assessments using the tool. So the top-down integration is estimating the impacts of the actions and incorporating this impact with the national projections. So this would be where you have your national projection, such as our PPD, and then you would look at the additionality of those actions and what they could contribute to that target. So this is where we are now, not just using, not just looking at the actual addition of the impacts of each of the individual ones, but we're also looking at it relative and how it could contribute to the national target, and looking at additionality and overlaps between those. And so what would the total contribution be to the overall national targets or trends, or projections, should we say. So And the top-down approach can be used to understand how to aggregate greenhouse gas emission reduction potentials included in the assessment and how they contribute to national targets, and which actions reflect ambition and go beyond existing policies and by how much, and to enable additional ambition that can contribute to enhanced national targets. So, I mean, I think this is really one of the main things about the assessment and the tools is really looking to see how to enhance those targets. Where can we improve? Where can we add and decrease the current emissions even further? So really looking at additionality by incorporating these non-state and subnational actions. So I think it's really one of the key points about the tool and the assessment. Then earlier I did mention a landscape analysis. This is not specifically defined in the key concepts section of the NSA guide, but you will notice in the tool, which we will have a look at just now in the beginning, it gives an explanation of the landscape analysis, which is really just understanding the landscape of the actions and the efforts in that area. So it's not necessarily a detailed assessment, it's more like a list of understanding what actors are in the space, what actions are being taken, and analyzing the ambition of the individual actors. So this is really, the landscape analysis is more just a sort of overview of the activities and the actions occurring either within that assessment space, whether it's be national or provincial, whoever is at whatever level you're doing the assessment. So it's really just an overview of the activities occurring in that area, in that space, and what their potential impacts are. So that, and we will look at that because the tool does all three of these different types of assessments, and you'll need to understand what your objectives are before you can define what type of analysis or assessment you're going to do, whether it's going to be a landscape, top-down or up-down. So we'll have a look at that as we go through the guide as well. So yeah, so here's just an example of a landscape analysis. As I say, this the guide provides a lot of examples to illustrate the various points. So this is a comprehensive look at existing commitments at cities, states, and businesses. So it really just gives you an overview of, you know, in this case, the number of states or cities that have greenhouse gas reduction targets, or number of businesses, or number of actions that are occurring. So this is really what is meant by the sort of landscape. It's just an overview of all the activities and actions and players within the region. So within at the end of part 1 and the key concepts of the NSA guide, it really just provides an overview of the steps that need to be taken in order to conduct such an assessment. So you'd need to determine the objectives of the assessment, define the assessment boundary, list all the actions that you're going to include in the analysis, list the relevant mitigation policies, document your results, assess the overlaps, and harmonize all the actions and national policies for comparison. So this isn't just an overview of the entire process. And then what happens in parts 2, 3, and 4, it takes you more detailed through each of these different steps. And so we will just step through these and link these up then to the tool as well. So as we've spoken about determining the objectives, this is really your starting point. Why do you want to do the objective, as this will help you define the boundary and all the activities within that assessment. So yeah, so I've just put in some questions, maybe just to see if everybody is following and if everybody is still listening on the other side. So what would the tool be used for? What is the main purpose of the tool? Can anybody answer that? Anybody? Yes, it looks like Jody. Yeah.
Morning.
Morning.
So some of the things that I noted was the bookkeeping of sort of actions that are happening at sub or non-state actions. You just also mentioned the landscape analysis to sort of understand commitments, sort of comparing those also to national. And yeah, sort of aggregation of impacts. Those are just a couple that I've noted from my side.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, you're correct. So we can do sort of landscape where we just sort of get an overview of the emissions. It also looks at aggregating the activities and looking at overlaps. Does anyone else have anything else to add? But that was a good assessment of what you'd use the tool for. Okay, then, oh, yeah, So I think we've discussed so what is the landscape analysis? Yes, I see, sorry, I see another hand. I don't know who it is. Just let me get a list.
Oh, it's Mr. Mabena.
Samuel.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Luena, and apology for joining late. I was held up in another meeting.
No problem.
Well, in terms of how participant could actually use the tool, perhaps in their own environment. I think also to add to what the earlier colleague mentioned, it is important to understand that this tool basically is designed and purposed to assist users to understand their the level of their impacts of climate change in their own jurisdiction space, but most importantly, it assists, for example, in understanding to what extent their regional climate change impact do have, for example, on a broader NDC or at on national scale, action. So basically, the tool is meant to understand how you impact on national emissions, for example. For example, the contribution of your actions towards the achievement of the NDC is one of the, the areas that the tool can help. This is actually important in view of the coming climate change bill, because, for example, provinces will be mandated to define their needs. And that goes together to say, what action are they implementing? To what extent are they contributing to the larger, mitigation measures in the country? Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Samuel. That was really good to hear, and just to expand on how you may use the tool, particularly comparing from provincial to national level. So thanks very much for that input. Bali, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Luwen. Mine is more a question than an answer to the questions that are being posed. Mbali Goke from KZN Government, ETIA. I just following up on what Samuel just said, I would just like to check that obviously provinces that have done or that are in the process of sorting out their provincial inventories are putting in place programs that respond to the needs that are indicated in their inventories. Could this tool in any way then help to, I'm looking for the correct word, to assess the impact that the programs that are being implemented for climate change mitigation are having?
Yeah, so I think that if you are implementing actions, to mitigate and reduce your emissions, then absolutely you can use the tool to input the information and to track to see what kind of impact those mitigations are. And the aim is really to have a list of your actions, to make sure you're including those actions, looking at their then potential impacts, and including that in the targets. So, we can have, so if you're having a lot of actions, and if you have projections, then you can also use the tool to compare with those projections. But yes, the tool, I think it will become more evident as to how you use the tool as we go through it. But you can definitely include the activities in the tool and then indicate what their potential aspects are, so that you can show at the end, this is what the provincial impact would be as well. So yes, and as I say, we'll go through some of those examples as well. Jody?
Yes, thank you. So just adding on to that question a bit, and it may be answered a bit later on in the session, but so a lot of the different sort of components of the tool thus far, it sort of emphasizes, comparing to national. So especially because we're working at provincial level, just sort of confirming, is it also possible then that, for example, when we have our provincial targets that we are trying to sort of measure impact to, that the tool will also be sort of suitable to measure against that, as opposed to just comparing what we are doing with national targets. So I suppose it's just a matter of data input.
Yeah, so I mean, we also had this debate, because when you look at it, if anyone's looked at the tool, there is a page where you input national targets. And so I suppose if you input the national targets, so basically the tool will look at all the actions and aggregate those actions. And then if you put in, if you want to do a top-down approach and you put in the national targets, it'll compare it to the national targets. But there is also no reason why we had this discussion, why in place of the national targets, if you had provincial targets and provincial inventories, and provincial projections, that you couldn't include that in place of the national ones, then your results would then compare your aggregation of your activities to your provincial targets. So you could use it for that purpose as well. And then, so I guess if you change in fact, once you've got all your actions in, you could compare it, you could put in your national data and then compare it to national, but then you could also put in your provincial data and compare it to two. So you could, and it's fairly easy to change the numbers in the national assessment sheet, which we'll have a look at just now. So it would be good to do a comparison for both. So yeah, definitely. Okay, good. Good. So it's good to have this discussion. I think we've answered most of these questions that we've been talking about now, where we mentioned that the landscape is really just an overview. So you don't necessarily need to incorporate information on any national targets. This is just a space where you can have lists of activities and their actions. And then we talked a bit about the bottom down and the bottom up and the top down approach and the differences between the two. So the one is really, the bottom up is really just looking at adding those impacts relative to a base, whereas the top down is looking at overlaps and comparing to the national targets as well. So we have had some discussion around that. So it's good just to understand the differences, but it is also explained in the tool as well, because you will have to, in your assessment, choose whether you're doing bottom up, top down, or landscape approach in the tool in the beginning. Okay, so I think those are good to have some of those discussions and really to highlight some of the uses of tools. Perhaps we can also visit that at the end again once everyone has a better understanding of the tool as well. So if we move to part 2, where we're looking at defining the assessment, it's important to define the assessment boundary and create lists of the relevant actions and select those actions in the assessment. So basically, this is meaning that, you can have a number of actions, but then maybe in your in chapter 6, it deals with if you want to select the specific actions that you want to include in your assessment. Maybe it's all of those that you have on your list, but perhaps based on the objectives of your assessment, you're only going to include some of the actions within your assessment. So it talks a bit around that, and then looks at the relevant national policies, as we have been mentioning, if you want to do a comparison with the national targets or the provincial targets. So I think in this case, whenever we talk about, or whenever you read the guide, whenever it mentions national, you could also substitute that with provincial in your cases as well. I mean, essentially, I guess it would be, useful with the tool to have provincial actions, and then it would be useful to actually combine all of those actions together again to get an overall national. And this would be possible because all the actions and activities within the tool will be incorporated in a particular way, which would make them easy to combine all the information at a national level as well. So just looking at the defining of the assessment boundary, you need to choose which sectors and subsectors are included in the assessment, and this relates to your objectives. So we mentioned that outlining your objectives of your assessment upfront is important, because this will then affect what sectors and subsectors you're going to include in your assessment. You may choose to include all of the sectors in your assessment, but maybe you are looking at an assessment for a particular reason that looks particularly maybe at electricity or around transport or waste, for example. So depending on your objectives as to what sectors you would include in your assessment. And then choose what actors you're including in the assessment as well. Again, you may want to include all, or you may just want to include particular actors and individuals or companies, for example. And then choose which action types to include. Again, this all relates to the objectives of your initial assessment. And to choose whether they're indirect or direct, this is coming down to your sort of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And then what is the period of your assessment? Okay, so you can do, to 2030 or to 2050, or whatever your choice is, you can define what the assessment period is. So this would be sort of your boundary, and then this would tell you what actions and actors are going to be included within your assessment. So this just gives you an example here of defining the assessment boundaries, what the various sort of options are, for example, and then based on your particular objectives, you would then determine what the boundaries are. So for example, here we have an example to identify, quantify, and integrate the impact of NSA actions to revise overall national emission projections for 2030. So you are, in this case, specifying you want it to be economy-wide. So you're going to include all the sectors, you're going to include all the actors, all the actions. And then you can also choose if you're including international collaborative actions as well. You're going to cover all the greenhouse gases and both direct and indirect. But again, so in this case, the example based on these objectives, the assessment is defined by the green blocks. But if you were doing it, have a different objective, you would then choose maybe the different types of options. So this just gives you an example of how you may define your assessment boundary. So we can have a look, because the tool starts off, the first page of the tool, or after the introduction, is really about this process of defining the assessment so that the tool knows what to include and what not, and then it helps you, it guides you with the inputs that are relative, that relate to your objectives. So yeah, so Brett, I don't know if you want to go through the introductory page and the assessment sheet with an example.
Sure, no problem at all. So thanks for that, Luann. So let me just see if I can share now. Sorry. about this. Okay, so here you go. So let's dive into the tool itself. We'll start off. So as Luann said, we've already sent you a version of the tool, and you can also download it from the website, from the ICAT website. We do note that there are a couple of versions of the tool floating around, some which have additional pages. So you might see one or two or three, I think it is, additional pages when you open up the tool, depending on where you got it from. Our understanding is that this is the latest version of the tool that I'm showing you, or roughly latest version of the tool. And but it doesn't change what we, the purpose and the structure and all that sort of thing dramatically. So you might see a bit of extra data. I also wanted, sorry, Luann, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I was just maybe going to say just the difference between the versions. So if you download the version from the website, it does have a few additional pages. And what they explained to us is that they had an additional page to which people use to complete the action list page, but they found that this wasn't very useful and that it was easier to bypass. So so the one that you download from the web has not been updated. The version that we sent you is a sort of later version where they have made some changes and you just input the action list straight into the action list instead of the additional page. So there are one or two additions. So we will keep you updated with any new versions that do come out.
Thanks for that, Luann, for clarifying it. We've also noticed one or two challenges where we have seen error messages on some of the versions of the tool. So we are going to resolve that with ICAT. We hopefully will meet with them next week or in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll send you an updated tool where we do highlight any where we have made any changes that do the corrections. But this version I'm going to show you now seems to be working perfectly, and let's hold thumbs that it continues to do so through this training session. Just one other note to make is that sometimes, depending on the security settings of your machine, you may get an error message which says macros can't run, or your machine doesn't allow macros, something along those lines. If you do get such messages and you can't resolve them on your own, feel free to drop me or Luann an email and we can help you resolve those. It's a bit difficult to show you how to resolve those in the session because it's different depending on your machine setup. A final note is that I have found it doesn't work particularly well on Mac. We will try and see, so if anybody's running a MacBook, you might find that it just says ActiveX controls don't run on a Mac. That is a limitation as well. We'll try and speak to them on that as well and see if we can get those controls pulled out. That's actually why I'm working. You might see me logged in twice on this call because my MacBook doesn't run the tool at the moment. So I'm running it on a Windows machine. So just those couple of notes about file versions and compatibility and security issues. Give us a shout if you're seeing those error messages, maybe send us screenshots and then we can just tell you how to get around those. So this is effectively the landing page of the tool, which Luann has already showed you a slide of. Again, so across the top has got links to any one of the sheets that you might want to go to. So you can jump between sheets using the top menu over here. And noting that the version you would have opened, as Luann said, if you use the one that we emailed around, you might not see cover and overview, or you might not see the actions list input. So you might have a slightly differently structured tool at the top here, but again, it does the same thing. So if I want to go to a particular tab, I just click on those buttons at the top, or alternatively, I can use my regular Excel click-through sheets at the bottom here. And you'll see that the different kinds of sheets that you have are color-coded. So the kind of introductory background material is red. You will have the input material or the definition of the assessment tabs are in blue. There are two screens called impact assessment screens, which we'll get to a little bit later on, but effectively those two you don't have to do inputs on. There are one or two minor things which you can change, but we would probably not go into those today. And then the final part, part 4, the yellow, is the result. So, and then what else they've done is they've kind of done an appendix, and the appendix gives you like worksheets and allows you to record your data sources and administrative elements. So that's how it's the color coding works. And then, as Luann said, we've got this introductory screen, which gives you a bit of a background information. So repeating a lot of the information that is already contained in the NSA guide, but is focused, I guess, a little bit more on the tool itself. So it gives you a purpose of the tool. It gives you a whole lot of principles, which you might have come across already. We did mention a number of these, in the greenhouse gas emissions training around completeness and accuracy we've spoken about before, but it just gives you sort of some thinking tools about trying to be complete, trying to be consistent about the way that we use the approach for tracking. Obviously, accuracy of data is critical, the need for being conservative, because we don't want to be overly optimistic, I suppose, about the impact of our mitigation actions, etc. So I'll leave you to read that in your own time. Perhaps the bottom one is quite critical to note, though, is transparency, which we always try and encourage, because you always want somebody to be able to come back and understand how the tool was completed. So, and if people want to interrogate the findings, then that's pretty critical. So just to constantly put in your references to your data and be clear about how you reach that data. This version of the tool also has some limitations. Some of the tools don't actually note that, some of the versions, but it notes the 3 limitations that Luann has already mentioned to you. And then finally, a link to the ICAT guidance. So this is the structure of the intro tool of the intro page for this version of the tool. So then what we want to do is go now to the assessment input. So this is really the kind of background information that Luann's already alluded to in her presentation, or mentioned in her presentation. And we're going to be using for today's sessions an example which is loosely based on an Ekurhuleni Green Action Plan. So have you pulled out some of the data from that? I note it's a city-based plan, but it's got some nice data which we can use on mitigation action. So it's the data is sort of based on that, but don't take it as actual data, if you like. But we're going to go through to the assessment input tab, and you'll note here the first thing that it asks you, it first gives you the information about what's going to be defined on this tab. So these are all the aspects that you can that you're going to input, and you can click through to those places on the tab. So you can jump to different places. There's also a data check or save button. I'll come back to that in a moment, and then a reset button. So this is just at the top. So reset obviously resets the screen. If you want to, put in new data, I don't know if Luann would agree with me, I'd probably rather download a fresh version of the tool rather than using the reset buttons, just because then you make sure that you're sort of starting anew, but you can also do that. So then we go into the different sections. So you've got defining the objectives, sector choices, actor types, etc. I'll do each of those in turn. But I wanted to just note to you that there's not only is there a bit of a description on each of these, on what you're doing in this section, but there's also an I button. So if you click on the I button, then it gives you a whole lot more guidance. So you don't have to remember what you're talking about. You don't have to remember all the inputs to the tool. You can go to the I button, and that will give you more information on what each of these things is about. So it tries to be very user-friendly from that perspective. Sometimes it's just additional sort of information you must note. Okay. So here are the 3 types of actions. The 3 types of assessments that we're talking about. And I know it's kind of repetitive, but we want to sort of encourage learning. But we spoke about a landscape analysis, which is just cataloging or grouping the mitigation, the non-state and subnational efforts around mitigation. The second one is the bottom-up assessment, which is the combined effect of the non-state actions. And then the third one is the top-down assessment, so the contribution of the non-state and subnational actions towards the climate targets. And as Jody raised, we could have a look at national targets, or we could have a look at provincial targets if we do have that information available to us. Now, obviously, each of these builds on each other. So we can start with a landscape assessment, and then we could change that to a bottom-up assessment and then to a top-down assessment. So let's just start with the landscape assessment and have a look at the different things that we're going to be, the kinds of choices that we're going to be making as we go through this exercise that we're using for demonstration today. So the first thing that we have to specify is what sectors we're going to be looking at in our mitigation assessment. So what are we interested in? Are we interested in all sectors of the economy, or are we just going to focus on specific sectors where we happen to have mitigation actions? So I'm going to focus today on transport, buildings, and waste. So the one note here, which Luann and I had some discussions on, and Luann, feel free to chip in at any point really, is we kind of said, okay, well, this is an interesting way of classifying emissions, because we, often an inventory wouldn't have a buildings category in the inventory. So if we do it according to IPCC guidelines, there isn't necessarily buildings in there. And we checked with them because that would be included in electricity and heating. So the response really is, as long as you carry the information through in a consistent fashion throughout the rest of the tool, if you chose to put the emissions into the electricity sector, but the actions were building actions, as long as you map them correctly onto where the emissions or the energy demand comes from, it doesn't really matter whether you put an action into electricity and buildings, or industry. Maybe you want to put industry energy. Well, no, that wouldn't go into electricity, but buildings might go into the electricity sector. So just be consistent. We are aware the mapping isn't one-for-one with what you might be used to, but as long as there's consistency. Luann, I don't know if you want to put anything else on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the next question, that it asks you is, what are the actor types that we're talking about? So the actor types are the people that are, or the owners effectively of the actions. So you could, because that it's all non-state actors, you could have companies, investors, civil society organizations. It's really trying to catalog all of the different actions across the economy, so it's helpful to identify here, or it's necessary to identify here, who the actors are, and then we allocate the actions to the individual actors. So you might only be looking at what you're doing as a province, but let's also include some company actions here for the purposes of our example. So, and of course, you can come back and change this as you add more actions. It gives you guidance here, and it says, make sure that you distinguish between energy utilities and other companies. So it gives you guidance as you go along, which is always worth looking at. We then get on to what are called action types. So this is, this word international is an interesting choice here. When one goes and has a look at the information, and I'm not sure why they chose that word international, but just to note here that they refer to individual actions as one that is owned by an individual party. So if a municipality is responsible for implementing an action, it would be called an individual action. The word international is a bit misleading, because what they say is an international initiative is something that is done by multiple parties. So it could actually be something that's maybe a partnership with the national government or even, I guess, private sector. Then you would call it an international initiative. I think it should be maybe a group or a combined initiative. But let's say we're going for actions that are by individual companies and by municipal, by the provincial government or the municipal government. Okay, so we're going through and just to reiterate, what we're doing here is we're just defining the assessment boundary. What are all the things we're thinking about in these assessments? So we've done action types. We now talk about target types. And as Luann mentioned to you already, this tool can look at greenhouse gas emissions targets, but it can also look at electricity related targets. Those are the only two things it looks at. It doesn't look at other energy related targets or other energy carriers or anything along those lines. So if you're looking at a waste target, for example, then you would need to translate it into a greenhouse gas emissions target. So those are the two types that we can have there. Sorry, I ticked in the wrong place. It should have been here, both greenhouse gas emissions and electricity targets. So I don't think there's anything definitional that we need to look at. And then finally, in terms of the kind of scoping, the emissions scope. So are we looking at scope 1 emissions? You might remember from the emissions training, a scope 1 emission is an on-site emission from diesel burning or from coal burning on a site. And scope 2 emissions are those associated with electricity purchased from the grid and heating from the grid. So these are definitions which came out of the greenhouse gas protocol, and it does depend on whether you're talking about only an on-site emission or in-boundary emission or purchased electricity as well. So let's have a look at both of those. We'll come back to them later on. All right, so those are really all the kind of, I guess you would call them scoping elements that we need to make decisions on. And now what we do is we talk about the period of assessment. So the period of assessment is whether we're interested in actions that run from now till 2050. So if we're trying to align with our, or look at opportunities that are targeted towards our net zero target, which is a 2050 target, or whether we're looking at something that perhaps is more aligned with the NDCs, for example, which sets a 2030 target. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give an example that runs till 2030 to look at sort of a bit of alignment with NDCs, although we don't fully align, but that's the time period I'm interested in. And then the final thing it wants to note, because we are interested in the electricity emission factor, is we look interested in electricity emissions, is we need to tell it what's going to happen with the electricity grid in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So do we expect our grid to decrease? Because obviously we got to, that is an external factor that's going to be occurring anyway, and our actions have to be additional to an emissions reduction associated with grid electricity. So it says, and obviously your grid emissions factor is also necessary to convert your consumption of electricity into greenhouse gas emissions so that we can track against emissions targets. So for those two reasons, I hope I've been clear there. If I haven't, please let me know, and then I'll try and re-explain it. For those two reasons, we need to say what is going to be happening with our electricity grid emissions factor over time. And obviously, that would be something that you would get out of, it might be something that you get out of the IRP. Some of the work around the IRP has looked at the decline of coal-fired generation in the mix. It doesn't, the current version of the IRP doesn't actually give you a graph of how the grid emissions factor might decline. So that's something you might need to think about, and we can talk about it a little bit later on again. So I'm sorry if I've confused you a little bit there. We can redo that explanation if necessary. So when we get to the bottom here, we've completed all the information that is required for the input, kind of the scoping of the assessment. So what it gives us the opportunity to do now is to check the data just to make sure we haven't missed anything. So I click on the data check or save button. It gives it some thought. This thing can be a little slow, I must warn you, depending on how much processing it has to do. But what it says to me now when I ask it to check, and you can't see that on your screen, sorry, I've got a pop-up window which says, all data is entered, please proceed with the assessment. Sorry, Teams seems to not show those pop-up windows, but it has told me that it's happy with the data and I can proceed. So I say, okay. And what it actually does now is it tells me below this line, the whole summary of what I've entered. So it just reflects back to me what I've entered here. It says I've done a landscape analysis. I'm looking at these 3 sectors. I'm looking at these 2 actors. I'm looking at these action types, individual actions. I'm looking at both kinds of targets, etc., etc. So it allows you to just get a visual picture of the of all the inputs. These cells you don't change. If there's something you've got wrong here, then you go back up to the top and you enter it again, and then you go data check and save every time you've changed some of the data. So that's the first sheet. Luann, do you want me to go on, or do you want to? Sorry, I'm not sure if we go into putting in some actions now.
No, I think we can stop here for now, and then I'll talk a little bit about the actions and choosing actions for the assessment, and then we can put in some actions. But maybe we can just pause and see if anyone has any questions on that so far.
Yeah.
Samuel?
No, thank you very much, Brett, for this presentation. I've just got a question, or rather comment, in terms of the action types. The other provision where it indicates international initiative. Could we, for example, potentially use this to list, say, projects that will be implemented within municipal jurisdictions, for example, under Article 6, like the CDM project, because normally they are reported, separately. Would we, for example, consider that? Because more so, because now, currently, since we are currently working on the Article 6 framework, and then once we finalize, definitely there will be projects that will be Article 6 project that will be implemented within municipalities, jurisdictions. So the question is, could we, for example, use this provision to assess those actions? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I'll try a response, and then Luann, you can chip in as well. So the kind of tagging of action types of individual and international is part of the landscape assessment, where you basically want to say, this many we're doing on our own, this many we're doing in partnership with others. I think that where I think that you would include actions in this tool is tools that you would claim in terms of reducing, contributing to the national mitigation targets. I think anywhere that you're doing adjustments to say we can't claim these actions as being part of South Africa's mitigation action, then you could still record them in this tool, but then there's an option where you say they don't get included in the aggregation, and I'll show you that in a moment. But that would be my guess, is record them here, mark them as international, and then say that they don't get included in the aggregation. Luann, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you can always, as you will see in the tool as we go through, you can say what is included and what's not. So you could just, as long as you highlight it, I think that would be the best approach. I think so. I agree with you, Brett.
Okay, great. Thanks, Luann. I see Jody, you've also got your hand up.
Yes, thanks so much. So just a question. So you said when choosing the objectives, landscape analysis, top down, bottom down, etc. So you see that they actually quite feed into one another. So just a question to elaborate on that is, would you need to like have a separate spreadsheet for each objective, or does it actually literally the landscape analysis informs the bottom up, bottom down, etc., etc. So effectively you can all just do it on the one spreadsheet.
Yeah, you get the latter. You would do it on one spreadsheet, because when we get to the results, you'll see that you can view, if you've done the whole top-down assessment, you can also see the landscape assessment and the bottom-up assessment. Luann.
Yeah, I think what's important, Jody, is that so you have the landscape, the bottom up, and then the top down approach that you can tick. So if you tick the landscape, it will only do a landscape analysis. If you tick the bottom up approach, it will do both landscape and bottom up. So it's like an additive thing. And so if you tick the top down approach, then you'll both within the same sheet, you'll be able to do landscape, bottom up, top down, all inclusive. So it's a sort of additional. So, it's just if you choose the bottom up, then it just won't do the top down, but it will still do the analysis. So it's all done in the one sheet. You don't need to redo anything.
Yeah. Thanks, Luann. Anybody else got any questions? Or comments? I mean, I think there won't be comments at this point. All right, you want to carry on, Luann?
Okay, great. Right, so that was just linking the tool and how to define the actual assessment. And so once you put those input in, then you would need to go into actually listing all the various different actions. And so we'll go into that example just now. I just want to give you a bit of explanation around this. So you would need to obviously create a list of your relevant actions that you want to that you have. So you'd create a list of all the NSA actions within the assessment boundary. So you've just described the boundary. So what are the actions that meet those requirements? So you'd create a whole list of those and organize the data by sectors and identify and address data gaps. So the guide, I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's just an indication that if you, the guide does provide lots of different tips for collecting information to assist you with this process. So as I say, the guide is really there to provide supporting material behind the tool. So if you want to know any information or get an example, the guide does provide that. So it provides tips for collecting information in terms of clarifying data needs, building on existing data, preparing tables and spreadsheets, etc. So you can go and have a look in the guide if you need further guidance in creating these lists and collecting data. So once you have a complete list that meet all those requirements of the assessment boundary, then you need to evaluate these actions and determine what you actually want to, which are suitable to include within your assessment. And then you would conduct your general overall landscape analysis. You don't, as we've spoken now, you don't have to, the tool will automatically have information and to do the landscape analysis. So you don't necessarily have to conduct a landscape analysis. You can go on to your bottom down or your top down or bottom up approach. But this is where it would be good to have a look at the landscape analysis to see what kind of activities and look at the landscape results, which will show you the actions and the activities that you've included in your list so far. So really, we need to select the actions that you want to include you can include all of the actions that you've got in your list, or you may have to define create a smaller list, a subset of this, should we say. And this could be determined looking at 3 different criteria, really: the magnitude of the impact, the likelihood of it being achieved, and also your data availability. So deciding what actions you're actually going to include in your assessment is dependent on these activities. So it may come down to, it might be a resource issue, for example. And so we have a look at these three different whether the magnitude, the likelihood, and the data availability in order to scale down the list depending on resources available. So the availability of information, this will be around understanding what kind of information is needed for the tool. So these are the types of questions that you would need to ask in order to see if you have sufficient data for each of these actions for it to be included in the tool. Is the time frame or target year specified? Does the action aim for a specific outcome? Is the target energy or emission related? Or if not, can it be converted? Remember, we saw in the assessment that the tool only looks at GHG or energy related targets. And so if your target of your sector is given to you in a different type of metric, are you able to convert it to an energy or emission outcome? Does the target apply to a specific geographical location? Is it a numerical target? Is it possible to convert to a numerical target? If it isn't, and are baseline data available? So these are just the sorts of types of information that you need to consider for each of the various different actions that you have on your now exhaustive list. And this will give you an idea of which ones you want to take forward and include in your assessment. So as I said, this is really around if you don't have all that data, you would then need to find the missing data. So it would become be more time intensive. You'd need to look for the missing data, and you may need to do more analysis and apply assumptions to fill the gaps. So in terms of completeness, if you include all the actions, it would be much more complete, but it is more time intensive and less conservative. So it depends on your resource availabilities as to whether you want to include all your actions and fill in all the gaps if you have data missing, or convert it all to the correct metrics. So this will take more time. So this will depend on what time and resources you have available. Whereas if you exclude some of those actions based on this assessment, the completeness will be less and less time intensive and more conservative. In terms of magnitude of impact, you could also look at this aspect for selecting which actions to include in your assessment. So there's major, moderate, or minor. So the changes in emissions or removals is likely to be significant, over 10% would be classed. This is just the guidance, would be classed in this case as a major. 1 to 10% is moderate, and less than 1% is minor. So these are just guidelines on sort of how you would look at whether it's going to have a major or minor impact. And this may then influence whether you want to include them in your assessment, if you want to include all actions in your assessment, or if you want to select those that only have maybe a major impact and it only includes those. So it's just really a way of looking at your large list and deciding which ones you'll take further through into the assessment. And similarly, with the likelihood, so they give in the guide a description of what would be likely, if it's possible or unlikely. So it allows you to look at each action and indicate the likelihood that's going to achieve those results. And similarly, you would either include all the actions that you have, regardless of their achievement, or you may choose to only include those actions that are likely to achieve their targets. So this is just a way of taking your very exhaustive list and making it into a reasonable list that would have the greatest impact within your assessment, and then perhaps just focusing the assessment more around those actions. But as I say, if you choose to include the complete list, that is fine. It just may take more time if to convert all the metrics to the appropriate, to comparable metrics and to obtain any missing data that there may be. So it's really down to resources as to what actions you're actually going to include in your assessment. Okay, and then once you have then all your actions and you've selected those, you have all the correct data in the right metrics, then you can start to input some actions into your tool, and then you can conduct with these basic actions, you will be able to conduct your landscape assessment through the use of the tool. So perhaps we can, Brett, we can now use some examples of inputting an action so that everyone can get a sense of the type of information that would be required in the assessment, and then how to look at the landscape assessment results. So Brett, if you want to go into that, unless there's are there any questions maybe before we go into the tool demonstration? It seems to be good.
Seems to be clear. Great. Okay, if you can stop sharing, Luann, and I'll share from my side. Okay. Okay. So I've moved on now to the next tab. So the first tab we completed was the assessment input, and now I've moved on to the action list overview. So that's this sheet over here. Again, across the top, we've got our option to jump between sheets if we want to. And then it's got a little bit of information that, just sort of what they could say important notes. They say just make sure that when you pasting data from another sheet, they did look at an input sheet at some point, just make sure it matches directly. It notes again that we only look at greenhouse gas and electricity targets, so we must look at that, and that it's got to be recorded in a percentage increase relative to the base year of the target. I'll come back to that. But it does say that you need to convert, if you want to look at other action types, convert them into these units. And then it also notes that there's a check column in column F to see whether there is sufficient data has been entered in order for it to be included in the aggregation analysis. So it provides you with an automatic check, so that you'll see this data check button to make sure that it works, that it's going to work properly. But let's come back to that once I've given you a little bit of insight into what kind of information is used in these sections, in this sheet. So this is the table which we use to input the data. So let's go through it column by column. So we start off with the actor name. And as I said, I'm going to be using the City of Ekurhuleni's Green City Action Plan to identify some of the actions which we're going to include in the analysis. So let's call it, municipal, just Ekurhuleni. Sorry, I've always got to get my spelling on this one. Leni municipality is our actor. Then we are going to look at an action description. So the first one I'm going to look at is financing program for energy efficiency refurbishment is what it's called. Okay, I do want to include it in my aggregation, all right, because it is quite a, it met all the requirements that Luann spoke about, and it is one that we don't, as per Samuel's question, we do want to include it in looking at our bottom-up and our top-down analysis. We then say, okay, what is our actor type? And it gives us our list of actors here. So our actor is the state, province, and municipalities. Our target for this one is going to be an electricity-related target. It asks whether it's an action or an initiative, and that's our question about individual action run by a single person or a single entity, or whether it's an international initiative. So we've had that discussion, international being a group of entities.
Sorry, Brett, just to say that your drop-down lists aren't showing, but
Oh no, sorry.
it's fine.
You
It's
have.
fine. I mean, the point,
Yeah.
just the aim is that if anyone has the tool and they want to look at it on their own computers, or just to note that there are drop-down lists for each of those, so you can have a look at those and select the appropriate one. You just can't see them on Brett's screen.
Thanks for pointing that out, Luann. And if you try and type it in, then it gives you an error message if it's not exactly matched. So you do have to choose from the top down, from the drop down menu. So that is what I'm doing. That's why it pops up so instantly whenever I've selected one. Okay, it does also give you options for subsectors if you feel that there's, if it has application. Sorry, no, I'm wrong about that. Under the when I chose buildings, then under subsector, it gave me the opportunity to define whether those were commercial or institutional buildings. So when I went to the drop down on subsector, because I'd chosen buildings, it gave me those two options. If I chose electricity, heat, and energy supply, for example, then it gives me the options of public electricity and heat, petroleum refining, and manufacture of solid fuels. So depending on what sector you've got targeted, it also allows you to choose a subsector. So this one was going to be a commercial building or institutional building subsector. And then it says, does the action encompass actions of smaller actor types? So I'm going to say no, it's just a single rollout. What is the geographical coverage? Well, it's a city, so my options here are city, regional, national, or global coverage, because you can use this at different levels, as we've stated already. And then finally, the action status. It gives me options of under consideration, non-binding commitment, and legally binding. So this depends on, whether it's just something you're thinking about, something that is non-binding. So it's a target that's been set, but there's no legal implications of achieving it, or legally binding of the three. So I'm going to make this a non-binding commitment. So those are the columns that you need to specify about the general information about actors and actions. And then what one has to do is provide it information about the targets that you've specified for it. So what we so in this one, we've specified that it's an electricity target. You'll see over here, electricity related target. So you'll see under greenhouse gas emissions, it's blanked all of this out. It's made it gray because we have to fill in data around electricity, not around greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to come back to a greenhouse gas emissions target in a moment. But what you will see is that it gives us opportunity to provide us information on an electricity related target. So what it says here is, it says it wants us to provide information about our base year information. It wants us to provide information on our latest inventory year data, and it wants us to give it the target information. So let's start with the base year information. So what it wants, what you give it here is, you give it the total electricity demand in that sector in the base year that you're working with. Okay, we have one of our first issues here, which we will resolve. Sorry, I thought this one was resolved. So just ignore that for now. Let's try that now. Okay, so we put in our base year as 2019, and our electricity demand for commercial buildings is 3.1 million megawatt hours. So I've just got this data from the inventory, which I've kind of worked with. It's just dummy data. We'll provide you with the data sheet if you want to play with this on your own. And at the moment, we have, let's say, around 10% renewables in the system. Okay, so that's the first column we talk about, is the base year of our target. Okay, it's the first year from which we're measuring our target progress against. Okay, the other information it wants from us is it wants our latest inventory year information on demand for that particular sector. So I'm going to say it's in the same year as our base year target. Sometimes one has inventory data for that base year, and other times your latest inventory data might be early, or you might have later inventory data. So sometimes a city or a province or a country will set a target from 2016, but it actually has 2019 inventory data. But for this example, I'm just going to say we have an inventory for the same year as our base year target. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to give it a 2030 target. You remember I said in our assessment input sheet, we were going to look at something which aligned broadly with the NDC targets. And so I only have 2 data points. I've got the 2019 target base year, and I've got a 2030 target year. And the way that this particular target was stated in the Green City Action Plan is that they were going to do a 9.9% savings of fossil fuel energy in buildings by 2030. So now you'll see that I can't just put in a 9.9% savings by 2030. I actually have to translate that into a final electricity demand in 2030. Okay, so I have to work out, and I've done this sort of on a separate worksheet. One could do it using the calculation spreadsheet if one wants to. I just quickly did a calculation which said, okay, if I save 9.9% of my electricity by 2030, my electricity demand will remain as 2,793,100. So I'm going to save 9.9% of that 3.1 million megawatt hours is 306,000 megawatt hours. So my remaining demand is going to be that number. And I'm going to expect, because of the grid rollout, to have increased my renewable energy to 15%. So just to repeat that, I put in the base year against which my target is measured, and I put in my latest inventory year data and a target year, what my demand is going to be. So those are the 3 points that I'm going to be putting in. If I had an interim target, let's say a 2025 and a 2030 target, I could have put in a 2025 target first and a 2030 target. Okay, let's do one more of those. And sorry, then I can do a data check and it can tell me whether I've got all my data has been entered into the system. Okay, so let's do one more of these and then we'll take some questions and we'll carry on, and then I'll enter a few more that we're going to that we can then look at in our landscape analysis. So my implementer again for this one is going to be my implementer again is going to be the Ekurhuleni municipality, but this one is going to be about encouraging electric vehicles in the transport sector. Okay, should it be included in the aggregation? Yes, it's still actor type straits, regions and provinces, but this target I want to show you is slightly different because this is going to be a greenhouse gas emissions target. So the rest of our things are similar. Here we're going to be doing a transport option, and our subsector here is around road transportation. So again, those were all from drop-down lists. I know that you can't see the drop-down lists, but those sort of led me through it. Are there smaller actors? No. Coverage is the city, and it is a non-binding commitment. Let's call it also a non-binding commitment. Okay, so you will have seen now, because I chose a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target rather than an electricity target, this information I can fill in, but you'll see that all the electricity information is blanked out. So it's telling me, okay, you're doing an emissions reduction target here as well. This one is and let's say we've got our base here again, 2019 for our targets, the same as the last one. And our road transport emissions here are 4.6 million tons per annum. Okay, so that's 4,600,000 tons per annum. And I think just to point out to you here, the criticality of getting your units right. And Luann will also speak to this, I think, a little bit later on. But just note that this column is in tons per annum. This column was in megawatt hours. So you must make sure that you've converted, if something is in gigawatt hours to megawatt hours, or whatever the case may be, you must make sure that you got the right units that you're wanting to use there. So our latest inventory information, I'm just going to, for simplicity's sake, put it as 4.6 millions. What is slightly different here about a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target as opposed to an electricity target is that the greenhouse gas emissions reduction target is specified as a percentage. You remember I told you when it came to megawatt hours, you had to enter the final electricity demand. When it comes to the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, you want to enter a percentage. And let's say we're going to enter a 5% reduction in emissions, scope 1 emissions from road vehicles as a result of this particular action. So I've given you two examples here, a scope, one that's looking at electricity in buildings and another one that is looking at electric vehicles in the transport sector. We can do another data check and all data has been entered and checked successfully. Okay. Now, that's only two examples. I'm going to just flip you over now to one of the results sheet so that we can start having a look at the landscape analysis. Obviously, it's going to be fairly basic at this point, but while Luann's speaking, I'll enter a couple more in here so that we can start having a look at how this landscape analysis sort of starts to shape up. So it is fairly slow to come to the party after I press the calculate button here. So it says, are you sure you want to update? It takes a minute to update, or up to a minute to update. But it starts looking at our landscape analysis sheet and picks up the actions that we've put in there. So it is slow on my side as well. Let's see if it's coming through. Yeah, Jody, go ahead in the meantime while we're waiting for it to calculate.
Yes, thanks, Brett. So just a question, sort of just a subtle thing is, once we sort of have these results, what is the export capabilities of sort of the tables, the graphs, etc.? Because often these things, you end up doing screenshots, etc., which isn't always ideal in communicating the stuff.
That's a great question, thank you. And it does have an export function, which is quite nice. I'm just looking on this version where it sits. I think it comes, there is an export function. This one seems to be, here we go. So over here on this sheet, which we'll come to afterwards, there are a whole lot of exporting options where you can save as Excel files, save as PDFs, save as PDFs. I think this should be the same on the landscape results. No, it's only on that one. So yeah, it allows you to export PDFs is basically the bottom line. Okay. Because the screenshots can be very, very frustrating. Okay. So now this is where our landscape analysis starts to shape up. So it says to me, I've got two actions.
Whether events impacts, but you assign them to the particular.
So sorry, I battled to hear that question. Okay, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a question, but
Yeah,
I think someone just
sure.
unmuted.
Yeah. Okay, great. So here's obviously fairly simple. We've only got two options, two actions in here, but these are the kinds of statistics that one might be interested in this landscape analysis. Remember, just a broad overview of the mitigation actions. It tells you you've got two actions that are being done by states, provinces, and regions, and none by companies. Remember, right up front, I said we might have some company and some municipality actions. We've got one in the transport sector, one in the building sector, and none in the waste sector. I'll put one in a little bit later on. We've got one which is an electricity related target, one which is a greenhouse gas emissions target. We've got two that are individual actions. So it's really just summarizing for you the information that we put into that first sheet, the assessment input sheet, and the action list sheet, and bring it together. So it says we've got, you know, these have, we've only got in midterm targets, which they define up to 2030, as compared to the total number of actions in each sector. So it's just different ways of carving up the picture. There's nothing on this national emissions coverage. I'm not sure why that one hasn't come through. All right. So, sorry. This you have to give the year of national emissions coverage. So it just says how much, you know, how big are we looking at here as a contribution to overall national emissions coverage. I think they might need a recalculate. Okay, so that's the landscape analysis and some of the action, putting in some of the actions list. I don't know if there's any questions on that, or Luann, there's anything you'd like to add. Otherwise, I'll hand back to you, and while we're talking, I'll put in a few more so that we can see how it updates this landscape analysis.
No, I mean, I'm fine from my side, so if everybody else is happy, we can carry on.
Okay, Luann, I wonder if we need a comfort break. I see we've been going for 1 hour and 3/4.
Yeah, and if we want to, we can do that. Yeah, just let me see.
We've got
Yeah, I mean, if you want to,
to.
yeah, I mean, if you want to take a break now, that would be fine.
Samuel, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Brett, for this presentation. It's very helpful. I've got a question here. Can, for example, municipalities use the, I know the circular 88 data indicator on electricity demand? That's question number one. Number two, that is the data that they normally report on under circular 88. And then also another issue is the Stat SA. I've got a contact, I think. They are actually currently providing update on a monthly basis on electricity generated and available for distribution data. And they do that on a monthly basis. This information actually include, for example, annual percentage change in electricity generated by all establishments, including Eskom and other producers. Then annual percentage change in electricity by all establishments, Eskom and other producers, ratio of electricity distributed to the provinces. They run that, for example, from May 2022 up to the current moment. And they do that by provinces. So I think maybe this type of data I can be able to share with colleagues can also help if they for example, intend to benchmark also against this as part of the assessment. Thank you very much. But I can provide a contact person who actually manages this survey on a monthly basis. They've got this information at the Stat SA. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Samuel. Luann, any responses to that? I don't know that circular 88 data.
Yeah, I'm not really sure on the data, but I think that yeah, I don't know what the data outputs are in, but if we can get it, you know, into the right metrics, then it can be included. I think that, you know, getting all the data into a comparable format is probably where much of the work comes in with this tool. Actually, I was just thinking now in the next section, it talks a lot about harmonizing data in the guide, and so maybe we can skip to that a bit to give a bit more background. But I think you can include any kind of information that you actions that you can convert into the greenhouse gas or the electricity saving metrics to incorporate it into the tool. Yeah, and I think any data that can be shared with anyone is always useful. I think that's always useful. So it would be nice to share some data. We can always pass it on to the whole group if there is data. Yeah.
And also, yeah, thanks, Luann. And I think also just look at how best you would incorporate it, because some of that might actually go into kind of the pathways input, maybe. But maybe, Samuel, if you could send that to us, then Luann and I can see where it fits in. Okay, should we take a 10-minute break? I think we've still got a fair amount to cover, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe if we can keep it to 10 minutes just as a comfort break and to boil the kettle. So see you at 10
yeah,
to.
so 10 to, yeah, what is the time now?
22, 19
Okay.
minutes.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so 10 to, great.
Thanks. Okay, if we give everybody a minute to get settled and then maybe we start again.
Brett, there is a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to maybe address that in the meantime.
I missed that. Let's have a look.
No, I think it's just come up now.
Okay.
Well, I don't know whether we should type a response because clearly in a different meeting as well. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe we could just mention it.
Yeah, I mean it's a very good question, and I think there's a massive danger and a lot of experience in sort of saying, if I understand the question correctly, you can say, okay, well, sort of to say 10% is a good number for a target. I think the challenge is one has to look at what's realistic. One has to almost build a target bottom up from what is feasible. But actually, I think, and we'll cover that in our next training session. So maybe we park that question until we've formalized a training on that. Because the target setting is quite complex. It's not a question of following a formula. It's the process which is the right answer to that. I'll type a response as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, should we get going again?
Is everybody back? Maybe just do a hands up if you are back. Thumbs up.
Maybe a few to go.
Maybe another minute. Let's just give it a minute and then see. Then we'll start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most people are back, so maybe we'll continue. Just let me get back to my slides. Yeah, so we have spoken about putting actions in, but since there are, perhaps we should cover this before we put into actions, but part of part 3 of the impact assessment in the NSA guide in chapters 8 and chapters 9 does provide guidance on how you harmonize the data. Because now we've been talking about input data, so maybe we should have dealt with this before we input data, but anyway, we can go through it now. So, and it relates to quite a few questions in terms of, the targets that you have or the information that you have for your provinces or for in the various strategies may not be all comparable. And so you need to make work with the data, analyze the data, and harmonize it and make it all comparable so that you can put it into the tool for the relevant years that are in the assessment. And so there is quite a lot of guidance in chapter 8 and chapter 9 on the process of harmonizing your data. So let's just go through some of the information. So you're harmonizing the data, as I say, and it's related to the questions where you have a lot of different information, different kinds of targets, different metrics. So you really need to ensure that the data relating to non-state and subnational actions, firstly, are organized by sector, as this just helps the process and input into the tool, as you will also have selected your sectors that you're including in your assessment. Identify comparable metrics within the sectors for the analysis based on your objectives, and express the actions in these comparable metrics needed, and record and justify all assumptions. Again, we spoke about transparency in the beginning, and this is of utmost importance, that you document your methodology and your assumptions so that you can complete the reports, and so it can be repeated. And so this process of harmonizing your metrics should be done within each sector, within the boundary, and then you estimate your potential emission reductions for the comparison across the economy. So these are basically the steps perhaps you would use before you start, once you have identified your actions and before you're incorporating them in to the tool. So as we've mentioned, variety of targets and types and metrics and may be different from those used in national policies. There may be differences in timeframes of the targets and the geographical boundaries and the scope of the emissions targeted. So everybody needs to translate, users need to translate the collected information from these actions into a comparable form for further analysis in the tool. So harmonizing, so I think this is the step that probably takes most time, and I'm sure that Brett can agree with this, because when you have a document and you just go, right, let's look at these targets, it does take time to make them comparable and to have the right metrics to go into the tool. So you may even need to collect supplementary information, such as information on emission factors or sector-specific data, and all additional data points and assumptions should be used consistently within sectors and should be, again, documented. So again, this idea of consistency is important. So we also spoke about, for example, the definition of buildings. As long as you use it consistently throughout that sector, that should be fine, and document what you did, then that is fine. And, that's really the crux of being comparable and transparent. So, and you need the harmonizing in order to add up and calculate your emission reductions. So your potential impacts or your emission reductions are your emissions in a target year, minus your emissions in your base year. So this chapter provides guidance on how to harmonize the metrics, and it does this per sector because obviously each sector has different types of metrics, and so it is quite good to go into the guide if you are not sure. It'll give you some examples for each of the different sectors on how you might be able to harmonize the metrics so that it can be in a comparable form to go into the tool. So there is a lot of guidance. As I say, for example, I'm not going to go through this example per se. Well, I mean, we can. This is just an example, for example, for the agriculture sector. So if you consider a hypothetical example of an initiative that aims to mobilize $100 million for sustainable forestry, out of which 5 million will be mobilized in the user's country. The user wants to assess the effect of the initiative on restoring forests in the country. The user can convert the 5 million mobilized into hectares of forest. So again, your metrics are then your hectares of forest. And this can be done by using domestic data, if available, on the average amount of investment needed to restore 1 hectare of forest. So you can see it's not always a straightforward, simple, take the information that you have in your strategy and put it into the tool. You may need to make some of these conversions using data, in this case, using data and information on the investment needed to restore a hectare of forest. And then you can determine from that how many hectares of forest can be restored. So this just is a demonstration of the kind of information or the way that you can harmonize your data. And as I say, the guide does give you examples for each of the different sectors because of the different metrics and approaches. So you can always go to the guide and get further guidance on this. And just another example, and this also comes from the working paper that I mentioned. All of this information is, as I say, on the ICAT website. But if anyone wants any of these documents, I can always download them and send them to the whole group as well. The working paper is also very useful because they've actually taken country examples and made some illustrations on activities and harmonizing, particularly around harmonizing data. So for example, this is just an example around harmonizing the target year and with the assessment year, because these may differ. And so in order to be comparable, you need to maybe extrapolate the data. If your target year is before the end of the assessment year, you may need to do some extrapolation so that you have all the data available for the assessment year so that you can, it is comparable when you incorporate it into the tool. So these are just, you can use assumptions, or if you have data. So again, here, it's important to document what your assumptions are. So in this case, where the target year is prior to the assessment, emission assessment end year. So in this case, you could either assume that there's no additional effort beyond the target year, or you can assume it continues effort at the same rate beyond the target year. And so then you would be able to get your emissions at the for the assessment year. But again, you would need to document what assumption you made in order so that the next person can see what was done and what the thinking was behind that. This is also important for if you want to use this, do a follow-up assessment perhaps, and perhaps you have more data, or you want to change your assumption, then at least it's documented to what you did previously. So as I say, there's lots of information both in the NSA guide and the WR working paper on how you can harmonize your data before entering it into the tool. So what happens is once you've harmonized and you've put all your data, your actions into the tool, when you are doing your top-down assessment, you still need to consider overlaps. So it's not necessarily all the addition of all the actions, because there may be different overlaps, because you might have different level of actions, and so there may be smaller actions incorporated into one larger action, and so you need to consider those overlaps. And so it may not be a direct addition just of all the impacts of each individual action. And so considering the overlaps, there's a chapter on how to assess various different overlaps. So firstly, you would need to identify the relationship between the actions, calculate the potential impact at a sector level, considering the overlaps, and then you would aggregate to obtain the overall impact and estimate and combine potential impact and compare to national policies and determine the additional impact and comparisons with the targets. So you need to consider the overlaps. So when I'm talking about overlaps, this is because we're considering a number of different actions and at different levels, state and company and individual actions. So we need to consider that there may be possibility of overlaps between these various different actions. So for example, you have what is the relationship between actions? They may be independent, and so there's no interactions between the policies and actions. And so you can aggregate the impact of each of the actions. Some actions fully encompass other actions. So perhaps you have a state action, but then you have a company action that falls within this, and so they fully overlap. And so you do not include an encompassed action in the final impact. So you've got to know what's already included. Otherwise, you'll just be double counting. Okay. Then there may be overlapping activities. So policies and actions interact, and the combined effect of the implementing them together is less than the sum of the individual effects of implementing them separately. So you can see there's lots of different kind of interactions and overlaps between the various different actions. So the overlap in this case should be determined and subtracted from the overall impact. So you would have the impact of the two, but you would subtract then the overlap. Okay, I'm talking about a lot of overlap, but you'll see that in the tool will assist you in calculating these overlaps. It makes some general assumptions and then calculates the overlap and accounts for those in the output of the tool. There is a way to adjust the overlaps, which we can talk about a bit later, but the overlapping is can be quite detailed, and there is a lot of information also in one of the methodological guides on how the tool deals with the overlapping problems. But if you use the tool, the overlap will already be considered, and the results, the outputs will have considered these overlaps. So then there's also reinforcing. Policies and actions interact, and the combined effect of the implementing them together is greater than the sum of the individual effects of implementing them separately. So in this case, the reinforcing effect should be calculated and added to the overall impact. So this is really if you're going into a lot more detail about your various different actions. And then lastly, there's overlapping and reinforcing. Policies and actions interact and have both overlapping and reinforcing interactions. The combined effect of implementing them together may be greater or less than the sum of the individual effects of implementing them separately. So overlap should be calculated and subtracted from the overall impact, or reinforcing effects should be calculated and added. So I know this is getting into a lot more detail, and so we can go through this when we have more hands-on training and when we have specific examples. But really what we want to illustrate here is that you don't necessarily just add up all the impacts from each of your actions, because there may be overlaps and there may be double counting. And so you just need to be aware of this and you know, incorporate it into your thinking and into your results as you are analyzing the outputs of all the various different actions. As I say, the tool does assist with this overlapping process, and the results account for overlapping, and so we'll have a look at that in the tool just now. So once you do that, then you would aggregate. Once you've considered all of that, then you would aggregate your impacts. Once you've now considered or removed or added in those overlapping components, then you would do a bottom-up aggregation. So here you would aggregate it, would be based with a bottom-up, it's relative to a baseline. Whereas if you're aggregating using and comparing it to doing a top-down approach with and you'd be comparing it and incorporating it into the modeled projections, national projections that you already have. So this will be looking at additionality to those targets. Okay, so yeah, so this is the overlap, but what I wanted to do, I just wanted to talk about sort of harmonizing the data before. Sorry, I'm going a bit out of order here, but there were a number of questions about harmonizing data. And I think so it's important that we go through that section. I think that, as I say, this is really more introductory to the tool and the kind of information that you may need. What we are hoping then to do is for us to come through to the provinces and provide more hands-on training with province-specific information. And so this would be useful. This would be an opportunity where we can sit with the provinces and look at specific strategies or data or information that they have relative to their province and work through those and assist in providing guidance on how to harmonize that information and how to incorporate it into the tool. So I just wanted to go into that. I think that what I just want to do now is go back to the national data, because this one will go into overlaps. I'm just going to go back to where we dealt with, this is where we left off last time, so you would harmonize the data and then incorporate it into your tool. And that was part of your action list in the tool. Okay, but now we also want to, so if once you've included your assessment boundary and your action lists, you are able to conduct your landscape analysis and even your bottom-down approach. But if you want to now incorporate your top-down approach where you compare it with your national data, then you need to create a list of the relevant national climate mitigation policies and actions, and document these various different scenarios, and gather and organize your national level data. So this is needed, as I say, for your comparison with your NSA. This is if you are doing the top-down approach. And it helps, the national policies and actions will help establish baseline and mitigation scenarios. As I've mentioned, if you're doing a bottom-up, then you don't necessarily need to incorporate the national policies. And again, as we mentioned earlier as well, Jody asked the question about with incorporating national data, you could also substitute that with your provincial targets and provincial data. So you can always substitute whenever I say national, or when the guidelines say national, you could substitute that with provincial as well. So it does provide a template for information for gathering national climate change mitigation policies and actions, looking at relevant national policies and actions, share of sectors' emissions in national emissions, looking at sectors targeted, what the target is it an NDC target or not? This is always important to note, whether it is actually an NDC, and when you want to include in your assessment, is the policy ND specific or does it contribute to achieving the NDC, impact on national emission projections, and of course, your data source. You will notice that there is a column in the tool where you need to indicate the source of your data and where you can add a link to that data. So to maintain transparency. So we can have a look now at incorporating national pathways, or as I say, if you wanted to do your provincial pathways, this would be the next tab. So we've done the assessment input, we did an action list input, and now we can have a look at the national pathways input. So are there any questions before we go to the example of the national data input? Okay, I don't see any questions.
Doesn't
so
seem like it.
Brett, you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that the harmonizing of the data is probably, as I say, where most of the work is going to come in. And this is where it can be tricky, because it's easy for us to provide a particular example, and then you go and get your data and it's all very different. And so you need to try a different strategy. So this is where it would be good for us to interact more closely with each of the different provinces with province-specific information so we can assist. Okay, off you go, great.
I'd support you entirely on that, Luann. That's the trickiest part and needs some big juggling. So what I've done while Luann was speaking was just put in 5 actions. So just to take a step back, and if we have a look at our landscape results now, you'll see they look a little more colorful than what I showed you earlier. So we've now got 2 company actions, 3 states, provinces, and regions actions. We've got 2 in transport, 2 in buildings, 1 in waste. 2 are electricity targets, 3 are greenhouse gas emissions targets. They're all individual actions, and they're all 2030 targets. So it's just to show you how this builds up your landscape analysis, and this can be used for reporting and tracking of where your biggest action is and all that sort of thing. This one doesn't seem to be working, but I have a feeling when we fill in some data on the next sheet, it will come back and we'll be able to get that data. Okay, so now, as Luann said, we're going to now go and look at our top-down assessments and put in some scenarios. So I just want to go back here and see we're gonna tick the top-down assessment box. So this also comes back, I think it was Jody's question about, can you sort of, do you need separate sheets? And the answer is no, we're building up our sheets as we go along. I think just an interesting point here is for the bottom-up assessment, it requires you to enter the reference scenario, and then for the top-down assessment, it looks at one other scenario. So the reference scenario allows you to do some of the aggregation towards towards targets that combined effect action, combined effect consideration. All right, so I've gone to the third of our blue sheets, bearing in mind this one won't be in the version you see. So we're now looking at our national emissions pathways sheet. And here again, it reiterates. So landscape analysis, you don't need anything on this sheet. Impact analysis, you need a reference scenario and historical and 20-50 percentages of total emissions. And then scenario analysis requires a third scenario in addition, at least one more scenario. So that'll make sense once I've shown you the sheet. Okay, and then we have again assessment input checks over here and a data check on this sheet. So assessment input check is just going back and having a look at everything's been defined at what's been defined in your assessment input sheet, whereas this one checks this particular sheet. Okay, again, information buttons and on the side here if you need further info on the data on what you might input here. Okay, so let's go and have a look here at how this works. So it says that you need at least a reference scenario. So a reference scenario might be a baseline scenario against which you're comparing your mitigation action to. And then if you want to look at scenario analysis, we can put in additional scenarios. So let's say we aligning with our national scenarios, and we've got our peak plateau decline upper and let's start with the lower peak plateau decline lower scenario and a peak plateau decline upper scenario are the other scenarios that we want to have a look at in our top-down assessment of the impact of our mitigation actions. We'll just to note on these, you can't the naming of your scenarios can't include a space or any other character. So if I PPD lower, it says to me, you've got an error. Please make it one word. So we call it PPD lower, one word, or I think you can use an underscore, so you can do that. That works. So we could call it that, but you can't give a space in the name of your scenario. But when you click on insert, then it allows you to actually give it a name for your scenario. So we click on insert, it does some churning over here to add the rows that are necessary below. I'll show you that for that PPD lower. So you'll see it's put in here, and now we can give it a name. You should be able to give it a name, but I'll have to unlock it. But it's scenario 1, and then we include our PPD upper as scenario 2. So with an unlock code, I can actually do that. We must get that fixed. So there are our 2 scenario names, and it's now put in the necessary places in order to be to fill in the data that we need on those scenarios. If you want to change your names of your scenarios, you can just use the update button, or you can use the delete button if you want to do less scenarios. So it also says there, you can use the reference scenario as the default growth rate outside of target years. So it will use that reference scenario kind of as an override where you haven't specified particular growth rates for particular actors. All right. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to give it the split between different sectors, both in our kind of base year that we're looking at, as well as in our future years. So because, let's say in a base year of 2015, we would have had, let's say, transport energy making up, let's say, 66% of the total emissions, buildings as 24% of total emissions, and waste as, let's say, a further 10% of total emissions. I'm going to come back to, the question of should they add up to 100. We'll talk about that now. But then over time, you might expect your transport emissions to go down as electric vehicles are introduced, you might expect your buildings emissions to go up as populations grow, and you might expect waste emissions to go up in terms of their contribution to your total inventory, either nationally or at the province level, depending on which of the targets and scenarios you're tracking against. And then that might be different depending on two different scenarios, which scenarios you're looking at. So for the purposes of my exercise, I'm just going to make them the same for the future years. So the split in emissions for the future years, I'm going to put the same, but you could make them different for different scenarios. Just a note on this, I think at the national level, we don't actually have that split in terms of our PPD upper and lower, because I think, and Samuel's welcome to chip in here, but we don't really know, the modeling around this isn't publicized as to what percentage transport would be, what percentage buildings will be, what percentage waste will be. I mean, the sectoral emissions targets will give us some indication of this, I think, but one would have to, again, sort of try and find what would be sensible data to insert here. Just one other note on this is I've made these all add up to 100%. You can do it in one of two ways. You can make them add up to 100%, or you can just, if you know kind of those three sectors are 70%, you can just leave the other 30% out. It doesn't matter. The model will pick that up. That kind of, that the other emissions you aren't accounting for here will be from sectors we're not considering mitigation actions for. However, we do need to then make a decision about what we give it in terms of our inventory data. So I'll come back to that now. So sorry, I'll just check this. So it says update. We click on the update button. It says calculations updated, and we move on to the next line in this. So this was the emission split historically and into the future. Now the next thing we have to give it is the greenhouse gas emissions data. So it says to us, what is our latest inventory year? And we said in the other sheet, we said our latest
sorry,
inventory.
Brett, can I interrupt briefly?
Yes, sorry. Please go ahead.
I maybe just wanted to mention, okay, I know here we're just doing building and transport, but there was, if you're doing economy-wide, we did have a query regarding the LULUCF sector, because how do you incorporate the LULUCF sector if it's a sink and it's a negative value? And so it does seem that the tool cannot really handle the negative value at this point. And so if we have a lot of actions that are related to the LULUCF sector, to enhancing sinks, then we would probably need to have engagement with WRI to see how we can incorporate that. So even though LULUCF is in that list, with a sink, it does pose some problems because you don't add up to 100 then. So for now, I think not including LULUCF, but if you have actions, then we can raise those when we speak with the various provinces and see how best we can deal with that issue. Yeah.
Thanks very much for raising that, Luann. Yeah, we will try and resolve that issue. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put in our inventory data. Okay, and I think that this this was something we were resolving yesterday. I think here, Luann, correct me if I'm wrong here, if you put in 100% of emissions, you would only put in the total emissions for those three sectors. Is that right? And if this only added up to 70%, then you could put in your total emissions. I haven't really thought this one through.
Yeah, actually, that is a good question. Because I guess we were thinking with economy-wide, and so then you would just put in your total emissions. But I'm guessing in this instance, we've chosen 100% so 100% is those three being added together. So you would only incorporate the total for those three those three sectors.
Okay, thanks. Yes, that's what I thought as well. So I'm glad we're on the same page there. So just to repeat that one last time, if in this case I've added this as being 100% of emissions, I've broken this up. So we're only going to put in our historical data from those 3 sectors. If I'd only put in an accounting for 30% or 50% or 70% of emissions, recognizing the other 30% would go elsewhere, then I would put in my whole inventory for this inventory data. If that's unclear, please ask us again so that we can clarify that. Sorry, this should be so now what it's saying to me is please put in your historical data that you've got inventory data for. So hopefully I've got so I've said my latest inventory is in 2019, and now I'm putting in the historical data from 2015 to 2019. So I put in just the total emissions, either from those 3 sectors or from the whole economy if I haven't added up to 100%, and I press update, and what it does is then it calculates my emissions for me based on these percentage splits that I've got that I've put in over here. So it says, okay, 66, 24, 10 of that 22,400 would be that 66% in the transport sector. So that's my historical data that I've put in here. And then I have to put in the reference scenario data. So this is a little bit painful. I would have thought that they would have done it for the whole thing automatically if it's just a linear decline, but one actually has to fill this in oneself. So what we're saying is that in our reference scenario, we expect our emissions to go down like this. So I'm just making up some numbers here to demonstrate what it will look like, 29,700. So this is kind of what we expect our emissions trajectory to look like moving into the future. And I remember I'm only going up to 2030. Sorry. It's because I'm only interested in kind of that alignment with our NDC kind of time periods. You could do this all the way to you could do this all the way to 2050 if you wanted to. So see that. Okay. So there we go. I've put that in. I'm trying to see. Yeah. Okay. So now what I do is I go update, and again it does this calculation for me based on my trajectory that I'd put into the previous row. So it says, okay, under this reference scenario, this is what we expect the breakdown to be in 2030 based on the percentages which I expressed over here. So these are in 2050 numbers. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So that's where we've got in terms of specifying a reference scenario. And then we will have a look at the impact of those mitigation actions on reducing against that reference scenario. So that's kind of for the bottom-up assessment. It does some calculations here just in terms of a reference emissions growth rate. And then what we would do is we would put in the similar data for our other scenarios. So you would then put in, let's say, your PPD upper and your PPD lower scenario, and that would then give you the data to look at your top-down assessment of impact. So I just want to have a look here at your kind of reporting of results. I will go and put in those 2 scenarios. No, it seems to need your other scenarios. Luann, do you want to carry on while I put in? Sorry, I'm losing myself here. So this is your impact results. So it's going to update my impact results after I've hit the calculate button, and it should start giving us our bottom-up analysis results. So sorry, it's taking some time. It's just busy updating on my side. Luann, anything you want to add in the interim while it's calculating?
No, so maybe just to point out that so you can see the overlap that I was talking about in the presentation. These are the calculations included in the green tabs, and you don't have to input any information on those. You can adjust the overlap number, but that is only suggested if you really have detailed information on the overlap. But as it stands now, I think the best approach is to not make any of those adjustments in the overlap. It will automatically account for it using the default settings, and so the results will already show the interaction on those overlaps in those results. It will already be accounted for when you look at your impact results. Brett, I don't know if you want to have anything else on the overlap section.
So thanks, Luann. I'd support what Luann said. I mean, this is where you change your overlaps on the overlap screen, but I find this quite challenging. It's sort of got this, the default factor is 1, and sort of according to users' judgment, there's double the assumed rate of overlap compared with the default. So then you make it a 2. And according to the user's judgment, there is no overlap with preceding actor types. For me, it's fairly subjective, so I would probably leave it, so I agree with Luann, is just to leave it with the default that you rely on it to do the overlap calculations. Yeah, so no, nothing to add from my side. All right, so here's some of the bottom-up kinds of results that we have. So it says here's the total greenhouse gas emissions under the reference and the NSA target. So clearly, because I've been putting in sort of a few municipal level targets, it hasn't had much impact on our overall reference scenario. But if there was, big national level actions, or if you had put in a data just for your province or your city, you would see a different, a bigger difference between the actions and the reference scenario. Here it says the total impact of the actions on greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for impact. So this basically says this is what the kind of savings has been in terms of emissions reductions, and then it allocates it per sector. So it said, okay, for the buildings, it's given a 2.8% reduction against the kind of reference scenario through the implementation of those particular actions in the building sector. It's also it gives you more information here. I don't know how much time. I think these graphs require quite a lot of engagement with, so I'd encourage you to have a look at the guidance and the actual tool. It says these are the actors' greenhouse gas emissions under a reference growth rate. These are the emissions with the targets. So that's basically the savings for particular actors. This is splits per scope. This is splits between greenhouse gas emissions and electricity related, international versus individual actions. So as we obviously complete our actions list, all of this data gets updated, and then split of emissions per sector in 2030. So again, I don't expect you to engage with this too much. I just want to show you that it does give you a number of different representations of the data that you can then go and use in your reporting. So this is largely for the bottom-up impacts. Luann, do you want to carry on a little bit, and I'll quickly fill in the... Oh, sorry, it also gives you data on the different sectors. So there's transport. You can change which sector you're looking at. So you can have a look at what happens in the building sector, in the waste sector, and it gives you that data for individual sectors. And then I'd go and fill in the data before we have a look at that. Luann, have you got more material to cover? And then I can quickly fill in the PPD upper and lower, and then we can have a look at that data.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't have lots more on my side, but maybe before we go, does anyone have any questions on what Brett showed now on putting in the national or the provincial data, if you will? Okay, seems everybody is happy. Okay, just let me... Okay, so yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot more to go through because we've pretty much shown you how to do the impact assessment, and we've spoken about the overlap section. You don't actually have to incorporate any information here. And then the reporting results is what Brett has been showing you now, which is probably what's of most interest to everybody. So as you can see, the tool really works along with the guide and does assist with doing all the calculations. So it's really only the 3 blue pages that you need to have an input. I think what is important with the tool is just to remember when you add in information to always to press the update or the calculate button so that it will update and incorporate any new information that you've put into the tool for that page. Okay, so I also just wanted to say that I've mentioned before that there is a climate aggregation tool methodology note. This guide does provide a lot more detail on the actual methodologies and the calculations behind the tool. And so if anyone is interested in that more detail, they can find this on the ICAT website, or just let me know and I can forward all the relevant documentation to you. I mean, maybe we'll do that anyway. Yeah, in fact, perhaps we'll do that. We'll put together all the supporting accompanying documentation along with the slides and send it around to the group so everybody does have access to those details. Yeah, so we've looked at some of the results, so we don't need to go there. So, I mean, there's not much more to say. Is that in section 4 of the NSA guide, it just talks about documenting the results and the methodologies. So there's not much to say here. It just gives you information on the types of information that you should record when doing your documentation or your reporting. So it just goes through the relevant information that you should document. And then there's a final chapter. The last, as I say, chapter 4 and 5 are quite short and small, and they just give guidance on how you would use the results for decision making and for planning. So yeah, so it gives you some guidance and some examples. The guide is really around providing examples from other countries or from the use of the tool, and so I think that makes it easier to show what they are trying to get at. So you can have a look at the decision making and the using of results within the NSA guide once you get there. I think that really sorry, so this is just really a summary of everything and the process that we've been through, and we've looked at how it links up with the tool. And so I think, as we've mentioned throughout the section, is that what for now, what we would like to do is to perhaps you have a look now that a tool, now that you've been introduced, perhaps try the tool out, put in a few pieces of information so you can figure out how to navigate your way through the tool, to use the tool. And as you start doing that, and then to gather up some information that you have that would be useful to incorporate into the tool. And then we will plan to have some sessions within each of the province to have hands-on training on the tool as well, so that it's easier for us to focus on the specific needs of each of the provinces and identify where each of you are having difficulties. So this is really where it's important that you try out the tool, or you can even look at the videos. But if you try it out, then you can bring your questions to the session, and then it makes the hands-on training more useful for everybody. So I do encourage everybody to try out the tool and to at least see how you navigate through the tool. So that's all from my side, other than Brett, maybe we can have a look at yours. And then only the last thing that I have is to talk about going forward what our plans are. But let's go back to you Brett to have a look at those results.
Perfect. Thanks, Luann. Yeah, so feel free to raise any questions at this point. But what I've done is I've put in some dummy data for a PPD upper and lower. And what you will see here is, so I showed you so far up to the kind of bottom up assessment. But now if we carry on down that sheet, we see that there are, so I showed you already the transport. You can choose which sectors you want to look at, buildings, waste. That's a drop down again. But then number 4 is the contribution to the climate policy. So here it gives us, and I think, Samuel, this was possibly some of the stuff you said you were interested in specifically, was you start to see, here's your total emissions under a reference scenario, so total emissions under the NSA target realization. So these are all the actions that have been put into this particular tool. And here's your PPD, lower and upper. Sorry, the gap between them isn't very big, but you would be able to see kind of where your implementation line sits relative to your lower and upper. These two should be spaced a bit more. And then also it shows you different analyses like gap analysis with the lower under the reference, a gap analysis with target realization, but between the PPD lower with a reference scenario, PPD lower with target realization, and then also various analyses of the different sectors relative to your PPD uppers and lowers. You can also then go and sort of change these things if you want to have a look at PPD upper instead. In that pull down list, I can now change this to PPD upper, and you can see the gap analysis with that scenario. And this one we had transport energy showing here, but there's a pull down list which allows you to look at, for example, the building sector. So the different sectors that we had explored as part of our analysis. The rest is just tabular information. I just wanted to show you one more thing, was that this is the final tab, which is called the reporting results tab. And this is where you can go and fill in all the different information about your analysis. So I think Luann mentioned this right up front. It's very important to document as much as possible. So you fill in your name, organization, date of assessment, have you completed it before, what is the point of this, what region are you looking at, who's the audience, and then once you have clicked, you have to manually click through on reporting update, this button over here. It will pull through a whole lot of information from the various sheets. So it says, what is our assessment boundary? It says, and then you can fill in more data over here. You fill in more data on your national scenarios, policies, and actions, but then it talks to the scenarios. Sorry, I see there's a bit of a lag. So it pulls through some of, so I guess the sheet is, in summary, a combination of documenting your analysis plus reporting on different aspects that you fill in. So all of the yellow blocks are pieces that you filled in elsewhere within the tool that it's pulling through to a single source. The yellow and these blue boxes are calculated results. And then finally, we get to this point where you can save these as Excel files, save it as PDFs, save it as PDF with annex, without annex. So they're all different options for putting out the reporting, and a whole lot of the data is pushed also through to the annex section. So, I mean, obviously these things aren't perfect in terms of their reporting. It doesn't spit out a Word document, but it hopefully gives you a PDF which summarizes all of this, which you can use as appendices to report and, take your screenshots of graphs and that sort of thing. And of course, the opportunity to save the file as an Excel file ensures that you can also save the, format your graphs and that kind of thing for further use. So that's kind of the reporting side of it, and also just to show you kind of the impact results once I've actually put in my PPD upper and lower data into the sheet. Yeah, so that's it from me. Any questions? Otherwise, Luann, if you want to finish off with process going forward. Lisa.
Hi, Brett. Thanks. This has been really, really interesting and definitely a useful exercise. I just think from a kind of practical perspective, it would be great if DFFE could pre-populate the national pathways input for the provinces, so that we're all talking to the same data, which will then allow us to have kind of comparisons. So I think that's kind of the one thing that popped into my head, that like, yeah, that would, rather than us trying to kind of figure out what is correct and then possibly not talking to the same data as provinces. But otherwise, yeah, I do it does look like quite a doing it the first time looks like quite an intense process, and I can sort of see frustration and trying to throw Excel out the window, but but I do think this is going to be in the longer term is going to be a very useful tool for the exercises that we need to do. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Lisa. I see, Luann, I'll just give one response to the second part of this. I think sort of going through our learning process on this tool, it looked a bit intimidating initially, and once one gets into it, the data entry is pretty easy, but the harmonization, and we're reiterating ourselves, I think, for the fourth time now, is really where it becomes where the grunt work is. So thanks for that input. Luann.
Yeah, I just maybe want to speak to you. I don't know if Samuel's still on the line, about the first comment about putting in the national data. Yes, we have spoken with DFFE about doing this and incorporating the national data, as you say, so everybody's talking on the same line. So we will be doing that. And I think we initially planned to do that, and then as we were using the tool, we ran into a few complications with the tool, and we just need to sort out a couple of those issues. But I think once we've done that, we will definitely incorporate the national data for everybody, so you all have that on hand, and it can also serve as, I guess, as an example of how, if you wanted to input your provincial data, it can serve as a guide for that as well. So we will definitely do that, and once we've sorted out one of the two issues with the tool that we're having, we'll send an updated tool with that data populated in it. Yeah.
Thanks, Luann. Has anybody else got any questions or comments or thoughts before we move on to the final slide? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, Luann. Over to you.
Great. Great. Well, thanks everybody for your attention, for sitting quite a while listening to us. We hope that we found it to be useful. I know it's quite a bit. That's why we thought we would introduce it and then perhaps give you time to kind of look at it and then engage with you further a bit down the line regarding the tool to see how we can assist. So what I just want to go through now is sort of our plans for upcoming sort of trainings and interactions. Other than, I also want to just say I'm going to put I'm putting a survey in the link now, in the chat now. I'd appreciate if everyone can fill in the survey. This is not just about the training, but it's also to get a feel from everybody what areas of the tool you'd like to hear more about, or any of the methodologies. If there's anything specific to your province that you want to hear about, it would be useful to incorporate that into the survey, so that as we go into more hands-on training and interaction, we can really tailor that to the specific province needs. So I'd appreciate it if you could fill in the survey. I have put it in the chat, but we will also send it around in an email as well. So other than that, let me just show you, go into what the plans are going forward. So as we've made a few adjustments to our dates, so where we are now is at the top on the training on the NSA guide and the tools. And so we've done training with WRI and DFFE. And so we've done now the second row virtual training on the tool training introduction, which we've done today. We did also think about having a session on lessons learned once we have spoken to all the provinces, and then maybe just having a sort of virtual session and hearing from everybody what the lessons learned on the tool, what they thought about the tool. This will come a bit later, as I say, once we've had these hands-on training with the different provinces. So what we thought about, and welcome to provide comments on this from the provinces, is that we thought about what we've called here support for provinces. And what we would like to do is to come and spend a day at each of the provinces and going through giving training on this tool. But not only that, there may also be support that we can provide on any of the activities that we've had so far, any of the inventories or QAQC or institutional arrangements. But the idea is to really organize a day to come and visit the provinces and to engage with you and to do more hands-on and tailor that need. Yes, I see there's a hand, Mbali.
Thanks, Luwen. I didn't aim to
no problem.
disrupt what you are saying. But you maybe first of all, let me just say thank you so much for today. It's been very informative. And as you would recall from our engagements in March, we actually, as a province, currently do not have a mitigation specialist within our climate change unit. So we really look forward to support while you still have a contract with the department. In the absence of Noloyi, so I guess I can confirm that she will be in touch to request for training, which may not necessarily be based on today's tool, which might need to take us back to where we started in getting support with you. But we absolutely welcome the provincial visits, because we have actually discussed that internally. And I think it's just going to be a matter of our director then formalizing and communicating that to you. But it's really been very informative and valuable in the absence of the required people to be doing this work. Thank you very much. You will be hearing from KZN with a request for more training. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Bali. Thanks for the feedback. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad to hear that what we've presented so far has been useful. And as you were saying, I mean, this support that we're providing here, it is open. It doesn't specifically have to be on this tool. We can also support you on any other activities. If any of the provinces have queries, I know we've had interaction with Western Cape, and so we're providing some support for them. But if any of the other provinces still have support that they need, it can be done during that in-person training, or you can get in touch with us beforehand. But I think we're just trying to be sort of, I think in-person is better. So we just have highlighted suggested sort of weeks in which we can possibly have these one-on-one engagements. And so we would like to, I'll probably send around an email after this training, just to send out a survey to find out which provinces are interested in having the hands-on training and what dates would be best for them. And it would just be a matter of us trying to organize that date. Yes, Brett, you have a hand.
And just please a request that we get the questions before, so that we can prepare ourselves suitably for it. Just the kind of topics that you would require.
Yeah. Yeah, so so you're free to engage with us. We have put these sort of tentative weeks, just judging by what all the other activities going on. But as I say, we will send out a sort of a question as to after this to indicate to find out when and if and when provinces would be interested in us coming through and having a day where we interact on any of the topics that we've done so far. These dates will be before the target setting training. which is our next real training activity. So the emission target training is being moved to August the 27th, 28th, and 29th. This is because there is the National Department is still finalizing the training, the target setting guidelines. And so we want to push it a bit later to try to have those finalized before we start doing the training. So for now, the dates will be the 27th, 28th, and 29th of August. For that training, it will be in person, as was the greenhouse gas inventory training. It will be in Johannesburg again. For that training, we have the capacity to allow 3 people per province. You can have less, but up to 3 people per province. So if anyone, again, we will send out another confirming email regarding these dates and trying to find out who's interested, because we would like to know as soon as possible who would be interested in attending that target setting training so that we can start. We've already actually started putting some plans into place, but we need to understand the numbers and the interest as well for that. So we will send out an email regarding that. I don't know, Martin, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that at this time.
Yeah, so just remember, Luann, that training in if people who are wanting to come to the training in person, the costs of the flights, if you are flying in, the accommodation, if you are staying over, if you're from out of town, and you know, the actual workshop is all covered by the project. So all of that is covered. And if people know that they're interested in coming, can I just ask that they just pop a thing into the chat now? You know, it's important for us to start to get ideas of numbers. We are looking at the logistics around this, so the sooner we can have indications of numbers, the better. As you said, we are going to send out an email to ask for confirmation of who wants to come. But it would be helpful if people, if they know that they're interested in coming, that we can, if they can just pop their name and where they're coming from in the chat now, then that will be helpful for us to plan going forward.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so if anyone is interested, as Martin said, you can put it in the chat, but we will also send out an email later today or early tomorrow to get some feedback from everybody regarding attendance for this workshop. Okay, I see Limpopo is interested. And also I see, you know, Limpopo interested in sharing the greenhouse gas inventory. Yes, if any province has is interested in support, please, you can also just send us an email, or as you say, sharing Excel files on your inventory. If you send me an email, we can set up a shared folder with you, and then we can engage with the provinces. And I think it is good for us to see what you are doing and where you're at, because this will help us to really be more specific in our training or our hands-on tools when we get together to discuss. So yeah, that's great. So if you have information or data you want to share or to have our input on, let me know, and we can set up a specific folder for each province to engage in that way. So great to see some interest coming through. Yeah, so that would be our emissions targets will be at the end of August. Then if there is a need for support on target setting, we will still have September, which we will probably start to do that support during September. And then, of course, we have our awareness webinars, which will just be a series of presentations all around general issues relating to climate change and mitigation and target setting, and have various different speakers. And so that will be just short webinars on July 10th, 17th, and 24th. But again, we will also send out information on that. So for now, this is what our plans are. As I say, we will send this plan out in an email, as well as a way for you to confirm your attendance for the target setting training. So are there any questions? And yes, we do really look forward to engaging with the provinces. So please do ask us if you have any queries and anything that you need assistance on. And then also, if we want to have tool train on the CAT tool, it would be useful if you have some information relative to your province, so we could work on that data specifically and incorporate it into the tool. So that would be very helpful. Okay, I don't know if there's anything else. Brett, do you have anything else?
No, that's comprehensively covered from my side. Thank you from my side too for your engagement, and look forward to engaging with you. I see there is one more question there. I think it's from Gauteng.
Yeah, Gauteng. Ari, you got a question?
Yeah, I just want to ask, in terms of the training, and you come to the provinces, would it be okay if you come to our offices, or do you need a specific place to go to? How does that work?
Yeah, we were thinking of, I mean, we can talk about it, but we were thinking of just coming to your offices. That's probably the best approach, unless you want to have a whole group of people. But if you've got space or an office or a conference room or something like that that we could use, that would be useful. But, we can discuss it if you need to.
Okay. So just the basic equipment you need then, like a proper conference room and projector, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it can, yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it just, if we have a projector that we can project so that everyone can see and share information, that would be useful. So it doesn't have to be anything, just the basic conference equipment would be great.
Right, thank you.
But I guess also, if we have one or two people, we can also sit around a computer screen. So it does depend on what the need is.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Isimbali.
Thanks, Luwen. Just quickly to confirm, I understand that what we are discussing now in terms of your physical visits for one day is based on today's discussions. But for some of us who were already planning to engage you for training on other components or elements, will your schedule allow you to then do more than one day physical, or for the other training requirements, we keep it virtual? It will just help us to plan. Yeah. I know we haven't engaged you about our other needs, which we are discussing internally at the moment. But while I'm here, I'm just checking if while we have you physically, will your schedule allow you to do physical of more than one day? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think it depends on the need. I think it's possible that we could do a second day. But I think it would be useful maybe if you engage with us. I mean, I think since we're down in a province, we do have a little bit of flexibility to maybe go to a second day. But then if we need additional, it could be we could do additional virtual. But yeah, I think if you want to engage with us, maybe just pop us an email about what kind of information or training you're thinking about, and then we can have a look at what kind of timeframes will be needed to do all of that, and how we can, what's the best approach for accommodating that support.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Or Brett, do you have any further inputs on that?
No, I agree with you, Luann. I think from just sort of to add to that, it will depend on how many provinces request our time, because we have a limited amount of time. But So if it's all of the provinces, then it might be less, but if it's a few provinces, then it might be more. So we'll try and pull together a schedule and see the need, and then do some juggling around that.
Yeah. Okay, well, if that's all from everyone, as I say, just make sure everyone's filled in the registration so we can get hold of you. And if you can complete the survey, that would also be appreciated. And other than that, we look forward to hearing from you and providing support and engaging with you, because I think by using the tools and engaging is the best way to learn. And even if it'd be interesting to see how people use the tool, and if they feel that it would be useful, that would also be sort of lessons learned down the line to see what everybody's thinking about the tool that we've spoken to about today. So yeah, and just the last note, I guess, is we will be sending around the presentations and any accompanying documents so that you all have that information available to you as you start to use the tool. So thanks very much to everybody, and we will be in touch regarding the upcoming activities.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Thank
Luann.
you.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.